Okay, here we go again with section B. Now, first of all, start by pausing the video for a moment and just reminding yourself what the scenario says. Now let's look at question 7. Question 7. There has been a recent cybersecurity attack on the bank. Discuss the possible financial consequences of this attack on the business customers. Now notice it doesn't say the effects that this will have on the bank itself. It says about the business customers. Let's remind ourselves again what it says in the scenario. The bank operates through the high street branches and online services. Most of its customers are small businesses who visit the branches and use the online services. Okay, so that's what we've got to talk about. Now there are 8 marks for this. This is a discuss question. Now because it's a discuss question, you'll be expected to write in paragraphs. There are 8 marks. Now I would suggest that you want to be writing about 3 paragraphs for this. Let's think about this carefully. Discuss. So in question 7, we're talking about discussing. Now, when we discuss something, we want to be able to describe it and explain what's going on. The way you'll be marked will be depending on whether you have explained and described what's going on. If you just make a statement about something, so something we could say, for example, is that the hackers will steal money. So if we say the hackers steal money from the business, that's going to get you into the stating. You're merely stating something. The most you can expect to get if you just state things is 1 or 2 marks out of the 8. What we need to do now is we need to describe how the hackers would steal money. So if you wrote something like, the hackers will get hold of the login details for each small business and use this to take their money. Now you're starting to describe what's going on. Now, if you start describing what's going on, you can expect to get 3, 4, or 5 marks on a question like this. So if you describe 2 or 3 different things that are happening to the customers in the bank, then you can expect to get 3, 4, or 5 marks, depending on how much detail you use. Let's look at how we can then explain how this will affect the business customers. So let's go from stating, describing. Now let's write an explain answer. So the hackers will use the login details of each small business to take money out of their account. Okay, so that's the same as we did for the describe. Now let's explain the consequences. In other words, how is that going to affect the small business? This may mean that the business will not be able to buy new stock, or might not be able to pay people who work for them, or might not be able to pay for for their office space, or any consequence, anything that this will cause to happen. Now, once you're starting to write answers where you explain what this will actually do to affect the business, then you're moving into the explain. And there you'll get 6 to 8 marks, 6, 7 or 8 marks. So what other consequences could we talk about? The obvious one is about how they'll lose money. But remember that cyber attacks don't necessarily just mean that people get things stolen. It can also affect the fact that people can't operate properly. So another one you could discuss, you could talk about the fact that the business can't access its accounts. So they can't use the bank while the cyber attack is going on. You could talk about the fact that the business can't put money into their account. So that means that their money isn't gaining interest, or it can't be used for other things. Now notice these have to be financial consequences. In other words, something to do with the money that's to do with the business itself. So answers about reputation of the bank or anything like that, or talking about ransomware because the business are being held to ransom by the hackers, those answers can't be counted because they are not financial consequences. So remember 2 or 3 good paragraphs describing and explaining what effect it will actually have on the business will get you into the 6, 7, 8 mark bracket for this question. Right, let's move on to the smaller mark questions that come later. So question 8. The bank needs to securely destroy customer data that is no longer required. Identify, so there you've got to make a statement, and describe one physical destruction method. So it's got to be a physical destruction method that could be used to securely destroy customer data. So we've been asked to identify how to destroy the data. So let's talk about a physical method. Now, physical methods are to do with the actual physical things themselves. So you actually have to be doing something physical. So magnetic wipe is not an answer because that's something logical where you're destroying the data that's actually on there by using a magnet. You can't talk about deleting. Deleting doesn't actually wipe out the data. So a couple of things you could talk about are hitting the hard disk with a hammer. So this is identifying what you're actually doing. So you could hit a hard disk with a hammer. So I'm not just saying destroy because it says destroy in the question. So I'm actually describing specifically what's going on. So I've identified what we're going to do. Another thing you could do is you could shred paper copies of the data. Those are your 2 obvious physical things you can do. Now there I've identified, so I get 1 mark for that. Then I need to describe. So I hit the hard disk with a hammer, which will break it into pieces. Again, that looks awfully obvious, doesn't it? But remember to state the obvious in your answers to get the 2nd mark. Shred paper copies, which will break the paper up and make it unreadable. Again, really obvious, but state the obvious. They need to know that you can do the obvious. Right, let's look at question 9. The bank uses YouTube to share cybersecurity advice with customers. That was mentioned up in the scenario. Explain, notice explain, so you're going to get 2 marks for each one. Explain 2 advantages of using YouTube to share cybersecurity advice with customers. So we need to get 4 marks, so 2 lots of 2 marks. So explain means it's going to tell you a consequence, or it's going to say a because. So I'm going to write 2 consequences. Now be careful about being too broad in what you say, and also be careful about being too, what's the word I'm looking for, too universal. Don't say things like everyone has YouTube. Not everyone does have YouTube. Some people actually don't own a computer, believe it or not. So don't say everyone has YouTube. So one advantage of using YouTube, think about this as compared to other ways they might share the details. So one way of sharing the information is using YouTube. And why is that a good way? One reason for that is because YouTube is widely used. So not everybody has it, but you can say it's widely used. Okay, so there's 1 mark for saying that. And then let's give a consequence of that, which means that the video is available to many people. So notice what I've done there. I've made a statement about YouTube and why it's a good thing, and then I've said why that's a good thing. So YouTube is widely used, which means that the video is available to many people. Okay, so there's 2 marks for that. 1 for saying it's widely used, and 1 mark for saying why that's a good advantage. So another one I could say is the information is shown as a video with sound. So there we are. I've shown a YouTube video compared to writing means that it's shown as a video with sound, which people may find more interesting. So we don't just say that it's a video, we say that it's shown, it's going to be more interesting. You could talk about things like that YouTube is free to use, which means that the company will save money. There you are. So it's free, which is a statement about its advantage. And then you say it will save the company money. That's your 2nd mark for doing that. You could say something like that many people find YouTube a very easy to use way of accessing information. There's 1 mark for that, which means that many more people will be able to get to the information. There's your 2nd mark. So make sure when you explain, you don't just say one thing, you go on to show its consequence. Let's look at 9b. So 9b, identify 1 other distribution channel that the bank could use to share cybersecurity advice with customers. So how are you going to get other people to see that advice? Obviously, you can't write YouTube because it's another one. So any other method you can think of where the information could get to the customers. So email would be fine, social media, and you'll get away with naming a social media like Instagram or Facebook.